We are continuing the series on revisiting a map of self care. And the last 4 weeks, we looked at our physical needs and our energetic needs. Today, it is the turn of our emotional needs. The last 2 years, more or less 18 months to 20 months, our emotional needs have got the greatest spotlight. And it is in this context that I want to talk about our emotional needs and our self care when it comes to our emotional needs. Let's look at our emotional needs and what does self care mean when it comes to emotional needs. When we look at our emotional needs, we all know that there are many, many ways in which we need to take care of our emotional self, and there are lots of emotions that we are looking at. So, when that is the case, how do we go about looking at self care? Are we looking at specific emotions or are we looking at a bigger picture? And that's where I think a map of self care and the needs that we have looked at would be very helpful because rather than looking at individual emotions, we are looking at the framework and how we can support our emotional self. So let me share what that means in terms of the map of self care. I think by now, those of you who have been watching me will be very familiar with this logo and with the layers of this logo. And for those of you who are just joining for the very first time, I would like to go through the different circles that we have, which is self love and acceptance. That is the foundation of self care and self awareness beyond that. And after that is when we start looking at the pizza slices. We have done the physical needs, we have covered energetic needs, and it is the turn of our emotional needs right now, this week, and the next. And when we look at a map of self care, we have looked at 7 different areas or 7 different ways in which we can start taking care of our emotional self. And let me go to those. We start with a unique framework to look at our emotional self. And then we're going to understand fear. Fear is a good thing and a not so good thing as well. And which fear is good for us and what kind of fear is it that we need to overcome? That is what we will be looking at. And we will be looking at the spiral of emotions. I think all of us have experienced times when we have felt in a we have been in a very bad space, and very quickly it has spiraled downwards to really a hole, so to speak. And we may have also experienced the opposite side, and that is we are in a not so good space, but then something happens, and very, very quickly we are able to overcome that and become extremely positive, overjoyed, full of life and vitality. So, we will be looking at the upward and downward spiral of our emotional needs. And then, when we look at the fourth one, is we have a negative emotion. But really, no emotion is negative. An emotion is just an emotion. It's just an indication of what's happening inside us, within us. So when we realize that our so called negative emotions are actually couriers, they are coming with a message. And that's what we will be looking at as the message of a negative emotion. And then we will be looking at happiness. Everybody wants happiness. And our most important need, which is love. So that's what we would be covering over today and the next week as well. So let's look at the very first framework to understand our emotional needs. We know there are many different emotional needs, and what works for me right now may not be something that's works for you at this point in time. How do I know what is it that is needed for me right now? How do I know what emotions or what areas to focus on when I'm taking care of myself at the emotional level. So that's what this framework is all about. Let's look at the framework. So, this is the framework. Again, it's a circle, and again, it's based on self love and acceptance because I think no matter what kind of self care we are talking about, we need to have that foundation of self love, self acceptance, or compassion, and self awareness. And within, on top of these two bases, we then look at the wheel of our needs. Initially, when I designed this, I looked at it as just for our emotional self. But subsequently, I realized that this wheel is universal. It can be applied to any of the areas, whether it's a physical self, whether it's an energetic self, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. This is a universal framework to look at how we can take care of our needs. So, how does this work? Depending on what stage I am in a particular situation or a particular area of my life, I may be in any of these different stages or needs cycle, part of the needs cycle. So if I am just going through a very traumatic experience, or if I'm going through into a very new experience for me, then I would be in a safety stage. And that is a stage where safety is paramount for me. I will be looking at everything else that is safe and nothing else more than safety. So, in this stage, when I'm looking at emotions, when I'm looking at physical needs, when I'm looking at intellectual needs, that safety governs what I do and what is good for me. The moment I am comfortable with that safe space, so to speak, and that's where, when we look at the word safe space, it is a space, whether it's a physical space or it's a virtual space or an emotional space, it is a space where if I am in that area of my life, in that zone right now, then it feels soothing, it feels appropriate. So once I have spent enough time in that safety zone, so to speak, I have provided the needs in that zone, then I'm ready to move on to the next part of the cycle, which is a comfort cycle. So when we are looking at a comfort stage, and in that comfort stage, I am ready to expand a little bit, but not too much. I want my comfort zone. I don't want to go beyond my comfort zone. Routine is very, very soothing for me. Things that I'm familiar with, things that I can do comfortably, those are my guiding posts, so to speak, when it comes to self care. So, everything about self care will be to ensure that I am in that comfort zone. And that is important. It's not always that I need to go beyond my comfort zone. There are periods of time in my life when that comfort zone is a very important part of my life, and I need to honor that. Once I have been in that comfort zone enough for enough length of time, I have healed, so to speak. I am a little bit more comfortable, then I'm ready to move to the next stage, which is the growth stage. And when I am ready for the growth stage, then I need to go beyond the comfort zone. And that's why, there are so many quotes that talk about growth is on the other side of comfort. And there's so many motivational sayings that tell us to go beyond our comfort zone because that's where growth is. And that is so true. We can grow when we are out of our comfort zone, which is true. I cannot be pushed into the growth. And that's what this cycle is talking about. I cannot be pushed outside my comfort zone until I'm ready for growth. And once I realize that, then I'll be comfortable wherever I am until I'm ready for growth. And this is like If we are doing gardening, I take a seed, I soak the seed, let it sprout, and then I put it in a seeding tray. And that's the comfort zone. The seed is comfortable with a smaller space at that point in time. And there's no need to push the seed out into the big pit where we are going to ultimately have the plant. Let the seed start sprouting. Let the small saplings come out, and then it is ready to shift into a growth phase, and that's when it can be replanted into a bigger area. So growth, our needs in that growth cycle, whether it's a physical need or an emotional need or an intellectual need, is going to be very different from my needs when I'm in the comfort zone or from my needs when I'm in the safety zone. And once I am in that growth phase, it's very exciting. It can also be very chaotic because there's so many things that are happening simultaneously. I need to start making sense of those. And that's when the next phase comes in, which is the release phase. And in release phase, I need to take stock and say, these things were important in the previous stage, in the previous 3 stages. I need to start pruning. I need to start releasing old stuff that I no longer need. And a good example that comes to my mind, I just popped into my mind, is I'm not sure if the current batch of students go through this, but when I was studying, and most of you will be able to relate to this, that academic year in school, when we shifted from one year to the next, was a huge, exciting period for me. The moment exams would finish the previous year, and I knew I did not need my books anymore, all the textbooks, I would take it and give it to my brother, keep it for my brother because he was just 1 year younger than me. All my notes, I would want to give it to him because I was very, very proud of my notes. I would want to give it to him. And he, typical sibling rivalry, he said, I don't need your notes. I can prepare my own notes. I don't need your notes. So he would discard my notes. And after a lot of, angst, so to speak, I would take my notes back because he didn't want it anymore. And I would then, in those days, there was a lot of minimalism by, just by habit. So we would look at our notebooks. All the unused sheets would be taken out, and all the used sheets would be then recycled or given to the paper person or used for something else at home. And all the unused sheets, then I would put it and neatly stack it and prepare little scribble notes, so to speak, scribble pads. So that's a release process. That's a process that I did at the end of every academic year, because only then would my cupboard have space for the next set of books and notebooks and other things that I needed. So until and unless I did this process of release, I didn't have space in my life for the next stage, which is renewal, which is my next year. So similarly, whenever we go through that cycle, unless I'm ready to release, I'm not ready to renew. And release prepares me for renewal. And once I am in that renewal state, that is when I'm ready to move on to something more exciting, some other new project, some other new thing that I can add to my life. And then the cycle begins all over again. I'd start with that something new in my life. I would start with safety stage, and then I would move on to comfort, growth, release, renewal, and then it'll go on and on and on. So this is the framework that we looked at as the first step in understanding our emotional needs. And when you look at this framework, it makes so much sense. Why does it make so much sense? It makes so much sense because I can then decide what stage I am in, And once I'm able to figure out what stage I am in, then the needs, the emotional needs of that stage will be different from the emotional needs of another state. So if we have small children, very small children that are going in, just starting kindergarten or just starting school, and if that child is attached to the parents and doesn't want to go and mingle with new friends, new teachers, new space, then that child going into kindergarten is in that safety stage. The emotional need of that child is very different. But if the child is really looking forward to more company, is cooped up at home, wants more company, then that child is already in the comfort zone. And again, if the child is in, settled into school, excited about all the things that they are learning, and they are now looking forward to doing new things, new activities, new clubs, all of that would become part of the growth cycle. And when they are in that growth cycle, then what happens is that maybe they are overwhelmed with too many activities, too many extracurricular activities happening at the same time, and their studies are being affected, or they are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of work that is happening. And at that stage, they need to release, let go of some areas of their involvement so that they can go deeper into whatever they are that is remaining with them, and then they renew, and then the process continues. So this is a cycle, knowing exactly for each area of my life which part of the cycle I am in would allow me to come up with a self-care plan that is appropriate for that level. So that is this logo, this cycle. And I would come back to this cycle a few more times through this discussion, because some of our emotional needs are again linked to this. So let's move on to the next cycle which we have, which is the next part of this emotional needs, is to understand that there are two kinds of fear. The moment we say fear, the one thing that comes to our mind is, oh, don't be afraid, move forward, be courageous. And that's not the whole picture. So some people say fear is an acronym for false evidence appearing real. And the other side of the story is face everything, and I forget. I forget what that acronym is. So there are two sides to that acronym. And this is true. We need to honor fear. When something is scary, it's probably because it's very important to us. It could also be our gut instinct telling us this is not good for us. So that kind of fear is something that needs to be honored. And I have this example here. So when we are looking at our fears, always go with self-compassion, approach it. Do not push, just as we wouldn't push our children over. Say, go and do this, go and get over your fears. We don't want to push ourselves. We need to constantly support and nudge, support and nudge. And in this context, understanding that we have a good fear, and this fear needs to be honored, and this is needed for our survival and safety. So honor the good fear. And in this case, we have got the mask. Of course, there's a lot of controversy about the mask. So if there's no, this picture here, we put it together just as COVID started, to say that there are fears that are important for us to honor. This is not a discussion on masks, so I will leave it with that. But there is one fear that is not so good, because that fear keeps us stuck in what we are doing. And this is the fear that we need to work through. We need to push ourselves through. We need to just go the other end of the fear, see what is there at the other end of the fear. And let me share, go back to the image here. You will see here that there is these little ridges in between each. I like to think of it as a chasm, that little zone where it is really that there's an amount of fear holding you in a safer environment. So if I'm in safety zone, going to the comfort zone may be scary. Doing something that doesn't feel safe, but it'll eventually will become comfortable. But at this point, it feels very daunting. So that first step through coming out of that may feel a little bit scary, and we need to push ourselves through, jump to the other side. And once we are there, it doesn't feel so scary anymore. And again, at each of those stages, going to the other side feels scary. And this is part of the process of growth. This is part of understanding that I need to push through this fear. I need to do this. And at the other end, I will be more comfortable. One way of looking at it is to nudge ourselves very, very gently to say, let me try it once. Let me be curious and see what happens. Let me try it once. And then leave it with that. After a short while, say, let me try one more time. So give ourselves 2 to 3 times for it to become comfortable. And chances are, after the 2 to 3 times of doing it, it becomes easier and easier, and it becomes comfortable at that point in time. And in this context, when I was working through this particular part of fear, someone on my Facebook profile shared a beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran. And this is how I feel that the universe is supporting us as we are going through these journeys. She shared the poem in exactly the same week where I talked about understanding the 2 kinds of fears. And that to me is a synchronicity, it's a coincidence. And I immediately loved this poem so much that I asked Jacqueline to prepare a very beautiful video on that poem. And that's what I'm going to share. It's just a minute long. It's worthwhile looking at it because it's so inspiring. And I must say that I have lots of videos on my YouTube channel. This video, this one plus minute video on my channel is the one that's most watched. I don't know where people are coming from to watch, but this is the most watched. And periodically I will go back to watch this video because it's so inspiring. So sit back and watch this 1.5 minute video, and then we'll continue the discussion on our emotional needs. Beautiful message from Khalil Gibran using the analogy of the river. It's about that motivates me every time when I need to push through a fear, just to remember that the river has no choice but to move forward. And it's not about losing yourself in that ocean, but actually taking on the role or the persona or the identity of the ocean itself. So there's nothing to lose and everything to gain when we are able to push through our fear. So that was the second part of understanding our emotional needs. And we will move on to the third one. Now we will look at the upward and the downward spiral of our emotion needs. When we are looking at this cycle, it is very easy for us to get trapped in a downward spiral. And when we understand what's causing that downward spiral, then we will realize the same thing that's holding us down, by working on that, can very easily shift that spiral to an upward spiral. It's that easy. Letting go means releasing the emotions. And this is the most important part of understanding, is when we are talking about release, we're not talking about releasing the memories. We're not talking about forgetting. We are only talking about that emotional impact that we have from a particular experience. It's time to let go of that emotion. It's time to let go of the story behind that emotion so that we can move forward. And that trick that decides whether it's an upward spiral or a downward spiral is the stage of release. That holds the key to whether we move upward or downward. And I'll show you how that happens. Okay, so this is a good example of the upward and downward spiral. We looked at this circle and then we realized that this is a three-dimensional view of that safety, comfort, growth, release, renewal cycle. Thus, if I'm here and I'm coming down, this is like if I'm here and I'm coming down, then it's a downward spiral. If I'm here and I keep traveling upward, that's an upward spiral. And at any of these, the crucial one is the release process. So I'm just identifying this as release. It can be any of these five as release. So to remember that release is the process that takes us upward or downward. Let's take an example. Let's take a situation where I have gone through a traumatic experience, something that was very, very demoting. Maybe I lost my job, or maybe I lost a relationship. And having gone through that experience, I am in a very, very fragile state. And as I am in a fragile state, I am in that safety state in my life right now. And that is when most of us, when we are going through that safety state, interacting with too many people becomes painful, and we want to protect ourselves. So our world actually shrinks to a very small group of people, small group of activities that feel safe. And that's okay for us to do it for a period of time. Once I am a little bit better in that, I need to push through my fear to do maybe one thing that will take me from safety stage to comfort stage. Any one thing. Once, whatever that is. So depending on how I am in that safety stage, just forcing myself, cajoling myself, getting someone's help to go through from safety stage to comfort stage. Do it one time, two times, three times. Then I shift from safe stage to a comfort stage. Once I am in that comfort stage, then my world, instead of becoming very small, becomes a little bit bigger. Just a little bit bigger. And I'm okay with that. Stay there. My needs are different. I need more structure. I need more information as to whom I'm interacting with, when I'm interacting. And once I'm done interaction, I want to come back into my world. That's okay. So I stay there in that comfort zone for a period of time. And at this point in time, again, using a little bit of cajoling, arguing, maybe, bargaining, maybe dealing, having some deals with ourselves and saying, can I push through my fear to come to the comfort zone, to the growth zone? And I'm saying this very, very simply. It may not be that easy. It may not be that simple. there is a lot of healing needed at each of those stages. What I'm talking about is once I have given myself that time and space and the things that I've done to heal myself in the safety stage, that's when that little bit of cajoling needs to happen to move into the comfort zone. If I don't cajole myself, I become so caught up in that safety zone, then it becomes more difficult. Each time I postpone coming out of that, it becomes more and more difficult with time. So give ourselves the time, space, the effort needed to heal at each of those stages, and then give us that nudge to push out of the safety zone, out of the comfort zone, and then into the growth zone. And when we are in that growth zone, trying something new becomes a little bit easier. Maybe we try it with friends and then realize it's not so difficult, and then we become excited, and that growth happens. When that growth happens eventually and we move on, we need to move on to the release stage. When we skip this release stage, that's when the downward spiral happens. Example, on the physical level, I'm eating very, very simple meals. I've had some stomach issues, some digestive issues, allergy issues, food intolerance. So I'm in that safety stage, and then I move on. I work with some supplements. I tone down what I can eat, and then I come to the comfort zone where a little bit more things I can add to my diet. And then I move from that comfort zone. I've taken care of my health. I move to the growth zone. I'm start eating a lot of things, new things. And suddenly I find that I'm constipated. If I'm constipated for a period of time, chances are my appetite will be affected. Unless and until the body releases the old wastage, it's not ready for something new. And that's the same at the emotional level. Once I am in that, got out of the comfort zone into the growth area, it is time for me to go back, rewind, go back into that time, into that space, mental space, emotional space, where I was hurt, where I was in pain, and make peace with that. Release the hurt, release the pain, release the sorrow, release the grief, release the sadness. I need to make effort to do that. When I do that, I create space for renewal. When I don't do that, I get stagnated. And when I do not take time out to release stuff, then what happens is that, say, okay, release is, okay, blue. If I don't take time out to do the release, the body, emotions are going to come back. It becomes a downward spiral. Unless I release, when I release, I renew. When I don't release, I slide back. I slide back to the growth. Then I slide back. Growth becomes unmanageable because I cannot keep growing unless I release some of the old stuff. There's no space in my inner world for further growth until I release old stuff. And because I am not ready to release old stuff, I'm going to come back, slide into comfort. And eventually, even that may feel difficult. I slide back into safety zone. So, by preventing that process of release, we are sliding back. And sometimes we feel, how come I'm stuck in this space for so long? And the answer to that would be, ask ourselves, what is it that I can release right now? Which of my emotions, which of my energy of sadness or grief, or what is it that I'm ready to release right now? And by releasing that, you make space for the new. Something exciting happens and you are able to accept and bring in something new. So that is what I wanted to cover today in terms of our needs. So let's look at this. So the release stage is most crucial for both the upward and the downward spiral of emotions. And I will stop with this and we will continue with the rest of the discussion on the emotional needs in the next week. We will be covering the message of the negative emotion as well as looking at other needs. Thank you so much for joining me. For those of you who are part of my Facebook group, do join me on Monday at 11:30 Singapore, and we will continue this discussion on emotional needs in something short, practical ways of incorporating it within our lives. Bye bye. Namaste. Do subscribe and hit the bell button for more weekly content on self care. And if you want even more actionable content on self care, do join me in the Facebook group for weekly lives, discussions, and more tips.